Welcome back, everybody. Very excited today. We have someone who's actually working in the field of mental health for law enforcement. Mo, I'm going to kick it to you though, and I'm going to let you introduce and kind of let you run it.
Perfect. So I am very, very happy and honored to have someone that's a friend of mine and I've been able to work with professionally. We have kind of satellite known each other in law enforcement, but we've really had an opportunity to work together on the mental health side of what we're talking about. So I'm really super excited to have her here. Her name's Meg Ross, and she is currently a Hope Line ambassador, which she's going to take a little more time to explain in detail about what the Hope Line does, what their purpose is, and give us an entire history and evolution. First, we want to kind of get to know Meg a little bit because I feel like it's important to know where someone comes from so you can see their passion. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Meg, like where you were raised, where you grew up, things like that?
Sure. So I grew up until I was in high school in Michigan. So outside of Detroit, we lived on a farm, and I'm the sixth of seven kids. So I have four older brothers, and we lived on a farm and just had to run the acreage for my first 12 years. And then we moved out our house was torn down to build a subdivision, and we moved out to a town not far, still outside of Detroit. And we lived actually right in town for a couple of years. But when I was 14, my parents decided to move half the family, the ones that were still under their guidance, to Oregon. So from Michigan to Oregon, I'm 14 years old. I'm in the ninth grade. We left right after Thanksgiving and got there the first week in December. And it was raining. It rains a lot in Oregon, and I hated it. So I finished out high school in Oregon.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Everybody had some technical difficulties. Meg, I apologize. You were talking about you moved from Michigan to Oregon, and it was raining, and that's where you finished out high school. Sorry about that.
Yeah, so I finished high school. I actually graduated a year early because I didn't want to be a senior twice due to the changes between Michigan and Oregon high schools. And in high school, I was kind of a business track. I was shorthand, accounting, typing. I'm dating myself there. But I did all that. And I actually, for probably, I don't know, at least my senior year, I was only going to school like in the morning and working 5 hours a day in the afternoon at a bank. They got me that job. So I was working at a bank. I did that, I think about probably for a year and a half. And I didn't make any friends in high school really because we moved in the middle and I was younger than everyone else in my class. Yeah. So I just really, I didn't like it there. So I start making friends at work at the bank that I worked at. And actually I made a good friend with a girl who was in the same class as my older brother and sister, so a little bit older than me, but she was working at the bank with me. Actually, she was working in another job that I started at too. So we've tracked each other through the years. So she became my friend, and over time, after working at the bank a while, somewhere I heard about a better job. I was trying to take night classes, trying to get a degree. I heard about a job that would pay better at the Eugene Police Department. So I became a records clerk at the Eugene Police Department. I think it paid better. I think maybe it paid better for night classes. I don't know, because it's a long time ago. But anyway, I'm working midnight shift records clerk at the Eugene Police Department and taking night classes. I did that for really probably only about a year and a half. But as I said, the weather in Oregon, especially in the wintertime, is miserable. And I never liked it there and really never forgave my parents for moving me there. So at 20 years old, I took a vacation to visit my aunt and uncle in Florida. And they said, you're welcome to come stay with us. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do that. So I packed my bags. And I came home from vacation and I told my parents that I wanted to move to Florida. And my dad says, well, I'll drive you down there. So in about 4 months, I had shut everything down and my dad and I headed out on the road on New Year's Eve, it was December 31st, 1984. So I've just hit, what is that? 40 years here in Florida.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we drove from Eugene, Oregon to Seminole, Florida. And I went and lived with my aunt and uncle for a while. And again, I've had experience working in a bank. I've had experience working in the police department. So the first job I could get was at Southeast Bank. I don't think it exists anymore. And I worked there for 2 months before the job that I wanted at Largo Police Department came through. And I became, again, a midnight shift records clerk, which you don't find anymore. And I think records clerks, if there are still records clerks, they don't work midnight shift.
Yeah.
So I did that for a while. I actually worked there for 3 years. I found that I loved Florida. Beach bum. As soon as I could, got myself an apartment on Treasure Island Beach. It was a tiny little efficiency, but it was everything I ever wanted. And so I lived in that apartment for 3 years, working at Largo. I went from being a records clerk. I got promoted at some point to being a secretary in the detective section, worked closely with the detectives. At some point, their crime analyst had to go on medical leave, so I became their acting crime analyst. And I really, really enjoyed all of that. And I really enjoyed the environment of a police department. And maybe it comes from the big family that I came from, the 4 older brothers, which I had at the police department too. So when they decided to fill the crime analyst position at Largo, I was not considered. And I was not considered because I didn't have a degree. Now, at the same time, I'm still plugging away, trying to earn my degree with night classes at St. Pete Junior College. And they're giving me about $30 a class to reimburse me for the class. So I was very unhappy with that. And I was trying to figure out what to do. And it so happened that I knew a guy who worked at USF Police Department. And, he said, well, Meg, why don't you just come be a police officer here? And, it's funny because at the time, no bachelor's degree, Largo Police wouldn't have hired me as a police officer either because you had to have a bachelor's degree to work for them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So USF, University of South Florida Police Department would hire me without that bachelor's degree.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah. So I don't know if I really knew what I was doing, but I said, okay, well, I'm going to apply. And I was lucky enough to be given that opportunity. I don't know what they saw in me because I'm not sure I really knew what I was getting into. But the chief at the time gave me that chance. And so the next thing you knew, May 1988, I was in the Tampa Police Academy with, I don't know, about 30 other, mostly deputies, but several other people from different agencies. We had Clearwater, we had Largo, we had DOT, and a couple Temple Terrace, and then I was the only USF.
Well, Meg, let me, Meg, just real quick, because I'm excited,
Sure.
and this is focused on Hope Line, and I appreciate it, but we might have to have you back for another one, because I am fascinated with what the Academy was like back in 1988, and I'm also, that maybe we'll save that for another time, but
Sure.
Also, you kind of touched on a couple things. You mentioned in your class you had a mix, deputies, police, DOT. Again, I think Florida and a lot of other agencies have gotten away from that. It's usually very singular. If you're Hillsborough, you're in a Hillsborough class. They don't really mix. But also, right. I didn't know this because this is my first time meeting you. But we share a lot of things in common. I moved around a bunch. And I also started off in banking and then transitioned from banking to law enforcement. So some similarities are popping up. But sorry, I wanted to get back to that, but I just wanted to highlight that because that is, to me, that fascinated with that and the evolution of how the academies have changed. But sorry to cut you off, but I had to point that out.
No, and actually that was a great way for me to get into law enforcement because of a small agency like USF. I had 20 deputies that I knew when I started on the street. And
yeah.
I've always said throughout my whole career, if you're in a small agency and you don't have a network of friends at other agencies, you're missing out because when you need something, you need to be able to call somebody. And I did. I had a huge network of people at the sheriff's office, a few more at Tampa, but most of my connections were at the sheriff's office.
Yeah, it's right in the middle. And also that USF was for a long time my zone. And I also got my master's degree in criminal justice at USF. So there's a lot of nexuses popping up there.
What's your master's in, Tyler?
Criminal justice with a concentration in management. Yeah.
Okay. So you didn't do the master's in criminal justice administration with Dr. Brownlee?
Oh, no. Yeah, that's what it is. I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm reading my diploma on the wall. Sorry. But yes, yeah. He was great, by the way.
Yeah. So I was in his first cohort, and that's another story we probably want to cover another time, but
that's great.
Yeah.
But you've actually touched on something Mo and I have talked about, and that's having a wider group than just being with, a lot of people are just with their zone partners. So you have, depending on the zone, 2 or 3, maybe most you'll have is 5 other deputies, depending on the zone. And so your ability to talk through things and to learn and to discuss your experiences gets real limited. But like what you're alluding to is like you had a larger network than most do because you had all these connections while you're in the academy. So I think we didn't know we were going to go in that direction, but there you go.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, sure.
So you kind of started to go down the path of this is what led you to law enforcement. So now you're at USF. Tell me about your career as it spanned across USF, because I know where it ended up. Yeah. It was amazing, but let's hear the progression.
If a lot of people say, oh, I always wanted to be a cop or whatever. I don't think I never saw myself as a cop. I think there's that imposter syndrome that I could say probably a lot of the time in my career. I'm like, people think I'm a cop. But I landed at the academy. I did well. I think there was a guy from Temple Terrace and we were kind of competing, and I did not get it for the highest score, but we did compete. I did very well in shooting, which was the first time I ever picked up a handgun. I'd shot shotguns, but never had a handgun. So, and interestingly enough, my first handgun was a .38 revolver, which I loved and I didn't want to get rid of when we went to 9mm. So did well in the academy, made lifelong friends. And Mo and I have talked about one of my lifelong friends, but then went out to my agency to start field training. When I got there, I again met a female, an officer at the time who became my field training officer, amazing mentor that I had throughout my entire career at USF. And I tracked her throughout my career. As she got promoted, I became, the next level, and I kind of followed her up her career ladder. And she taught me so much. So I'm a patrol officer. I spent 5 years as an officer. Somewhere along the line, I became a field training officer, really finding out that, hey, you are a cop now. And, the people expect you to be able to handle things. So I really, my experience in the academy really did prepare me for it. I just think that I went in there without really very little thought as to what that all might entail. So there I am on the street, and, at the university, I have to say we have more of the best kind of law enforcement and less of the worst. So I get to go walk around. We do a lot of things that are not law enforcement. We did anyway. A lot of this has changed, but Saturday mornings, all the different events that were going on in the campus buildings, we had to go unlock the doors for. So had a lot of keys, did a lot of unlocking doors, but we had real police calls too. But that gave me an opportunity to get out and be a community kind of an officer. So I knew the students, I knew the faculty, I knew the staff. I'm out there in the community all the time. I spent 5 years as an officer. I got promoted to corporal. I spent 5 years as a patrol corporal, and then another 5 years as a patrol sergeant. So my first 15 years at USF were as a patrol officer in one capacity or another. A lot of agencies, you talk about the best position, and I'll say it's a lieutenant, but at USF, the best position ever was a patrol sergeant, because at midnight shifts in patrol, the sergeant is it. King of the world, I used to say. Yep. And I always said that was really the best. And I will say that what I learned is that it's great until you realize that you don't have all the answers. And the one time I really can say that I realized I didn't have all the answers was with a mental health challenge with one of my colleagues.
Oh, wow.
So it's really kind of driven the direction I ended up in the rest of my career and then now into retirement. So providing support to our colleagues, and I say this all the time now, we are all peer support, whether we have had peer support training or not.
Yeah.
How many times have you talked to somebody at 3:00 in the morning and they've told you things that they really shouldn't be telling their coworker, they should be telling their spouse.
Right.
But we 3:00 in the morning, we have all these conversations. And so, yeah, having that resource of knowing what to tell your colleague or your coworker, really found out that that's where I felt like I was lacking at the sergeant level.
Real quick, I'm sorry. You keep bringing up such good points, and I love it. But I just want to elaborate a little bit on USF law enforcement, the police department, because a lot of people might be thinking, because we have other people listening that are not in law enforcement, and even some that do, they think campus security or something like that. It is not that way. From my understanding, it's I think in some cases you have more arrest powers than the deputies because you have state authority. Is that correct?
Well, we are state officers, so we do have state authority. It is limited by jurisdiction, but we also have the mutual aid with our surrounding agencies, and we have it with every agency. So we can handle anything off campus so long as we let the other agency know that we're going to be doing that. And what is, I actually just had this conversation, but what's really great about being on a campus as a police officer is you kind of get to do everything. So we don't have a crime scene unit, so you're going to do your own crime scene processing. Up to a point, we're going to bring in somebody to do a murder investigation to do the crime scene, but we do everything, and we assist at a murder scene, but we don't have enough. The frequency of that is much lower. So, but there's also the opportunities to do detectives and really any case you want to work, they allow it because we just don't have the manpower. You know, we don't have units. We don't have a financial crimes unit and a burglary unit and a homicide unit. We have 3 detectives and, you know, they're all hazards kind of thing as well. So, but I think the officers really, it's an all hazards kind of thing. You learn to do everything. Yeah. You have to be a traffic officer. You have to be able to work crashes. You have to be able to take the bike thefts, but you also have to work we have the credit union on campus. You had to work the financial crimes. You had to work the cashier's office and, you know, the fraud that went on. You know, there were cases of fraud with diplomas or degrees that were fraudulently created. So
I think, like he says, though, people have they have a vision of what they think it looks like. They just walk around and unlock doors, like you said. That might be a piece of it. You're full-fledged law enforcement officers that are tasked with doing everything that all other law enforcement agencies have to deal with. Sometimes enormous scale.
Right. Well, go ahead.
That's the other thing is like a campus as large as University of South Florida, you're getting a full domestics, sexual assaults, murders, robberies, and you'll get bleed over from the community because some parts of campus butts up to the higher crime areas. I'll say it politically correct. And so you get, and so that was I interacted with the USF guys all the time just because of where my zone was. And that's when I started not only gaining an appreciation, but just the magnitude. Because like what you're saying, if we had some sort of murder or, you know, a fatal crash or whatever, we had people that would do that. So I was usually just waiting for them. But you're like, no, we pretty much have to handle all this stuff on our own. We don't really have a large enough force to kind of just do what you're doing. And so I kind of want to paint that picture to just explain the scope of experience that you gain by being on a campus. And you alluded to it as well. You actually get out and meet with the students. And correct me if I'm wrong, I would assume the most people that are on campus, the professors, the ancillary, people that assist, and then also the students, they're there for a positive reason. They're trying to gain a degree, they're really positive, they're encouraged, they're excited. There's a mutual respect, but you do still have a criminal element that you have to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody did a study once and found that 60% of the crimes that happen on campus are people that don't belong on campus. They come onto campus to commit that crime. So yeah, the great majority of the people there are law-abiding citizens, but we have to protect them. And absolutely, we have a hotel on campus. We have hospitals. We have a medical center that does outpatient surgery. We have, it used to be just an elementary school, but now it's up through middle school on campus. And then, of course, we have the athletic areas. So we have the Yingling Center. I have to remember that. It used to be the Sundome.
Yeah.
We used to have something called the Special Events Center. We do have murders. During my career, there were, I'm trying to think if it was 2 or 3. And so isn't that nice? I only have to talk about 2 or 3 murders in my long career. But again, what happens when that happens is we don't have a crime scene unit. So we have to set up a perimeter. And we do get assistance from either FDLE or usually Tampa because the university is within the city of Tampa. But we still have to do so much more that most, road deputies would do, have one role in that. And I'm happy to say that these murders that have occurred during my career, every one of them was cleared with an arrest.
Awesome. So to simplify all this, though, we're talking about all these things, but you guys are essentially a city. Yeah, a city within a city. You have all I'm listening to you name off. You have hospitals. You have this. You're a city within a city, and you're tasked with patrolling that city. With sometimes when you look in comparison with how many thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people that are on campus, there are only a couple of y'all.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So about the same size as far as manpower as Temple Terrace Police Department, which is a bordering city, but probably twice the number of people on campus, at least in comparison to their residential population.
Wow.
Because we have the daytime population and then we have, 24/7 population. And then we have the events that bring in even more people. So yeah, it's a small city and it has all the problems and all the benefits of a small city.
So you left off saying you were at the point in your career where you were a sergeant, and that's where you started to realize where you lacked was the mental health piece. And after sergeant, where did you go?
So a couple of things happened about that time. So in 2000, we had an officer, 2001, who had been medically retired. And within 6 months of being medically retired, she died by suicide. Yeah. And, we hear this a lot, but it was a shock to us because we'd never seen that before. Right. So somehow I got picked, maybe because I didn't have any of these external assignments, because we all had something different. Maybe it was because I was a new enough sergeant that they picked me, but they sent me to training to do critical incident debriefing. Okay. So I joined the Tampa Bay Regional Critical Incident Team in about 2001, and I was the agency liaison. And so what that organization does is goes out and does debriefings and diffusings, which is a process to take somebody through what happened at a critical incident. So an officer-involved shooting, a crime scene that is beyond imaginable to most of the American public that our officers and deputies have to respond to. Well, this is designed to help them talk through some of it and to share. One of the things that talk about is there's a piece of the puzzle that everybody has. So, everyone who responded to this one scene is going to have a different view. Yes. So we bring them all together into a room and we take them through what they knew, what they saw, what they'd like to change, and, bring them back out with, these are things that you're experiencing that are not normal. Right. But how you're experiencing them are very normal reactions to an unusual situation. Yeah. We see things that you can't unsee. Yeah. And that no one should have to see. Yeah. So that started me kind of on that. And I continued in that role as the liaison and a peer throughout the rest of my career. Now, I backed away from it a little bit as I advanced in rank, but always maintained those connections and always felt as though it was kind of my role to try to ensure that we were taking care of our people. And after any kind of a critical incident. So that's kind of how my trajectory. But in 2003, that was the year I got married. So my first 15 years, I'm single. And in 2003, I got married and I moved inside to become the accreditation manager as a sergeant. So I'd been 5 years on the street as a sergeant, and now I'm inside as a sergeant over accreditation. I got us through our first reaccreditation. I got promoted to lieutenant. I kept that job, but I got 3 more. I was now a lieutenant over accreditation and records and communications and internal affairs. And I was a public information officer. So I did that I did that until 2010. And in 2010, we did some reorganization and I was given the position as a patrol lieutenant. Now at the time we had 2 patrol lieutenants, one for days and one for nights, but we reorganized and I became the patrol lieutenant over all 4 shifts.
Oh, wow.
So when a lot of agencies, the patrol lieutenant is the one who's in charge on midnight shift. Well, at USF, there's not a lieutenant around.
Right.
The sergeant is the one who's really in charge on the shift. So I am the patrol lieutenant with 4 shifts. And really, there's a long story there. I really thought I was being set up to be fired because we went from 2 lieutenants to 1. I'm now it. And there were some other things going on. The chief and I were not on the best of terms. And as the accreditation manager, I worked very closely with the chief. So,
right.
But I got my sergeants behind me and boy, some of the best times in my career. And we were very successful. We were involved in some things that we won some awards with. Law Enforcement Challenge. I don't know. It was a traffic enforcement initiative. So we did great. In 2014, after a change in chiefs, the first thing the new chief did, who had been the assistant chief, the first thing the new chief did was make me a captain.
Oh, wow.
So I became the operations captain. So over all of, detectives and patrol and specialty units. A great part of that story was that my mentor had been a lieutenant she was over detectives and all that. And she was getting ready to retire in the same year, in March. So in January of 2014, I became captain over her, and she pulled me aside and said, how proud she was of me. And really, she's the one who told me this. It didn't really occur to me, but I became the first female captain in the history of the agency.
Wow.
And I still am the highest ranking female in that agency, or was. They have not moved anyone up to that rank yet.
That's awesome.
So it was pretty special, and special for her to give me such high praise when I really believe that without her, I never would have done the things I did.
Oh.
So I did operations captain for a couple of years. I went into drop in 2016. And at that point, they moved me over to administration captain. And I did that until the last couple months of my last few months, when the assistant chief at the time resigned and I was the last one standing. So I became the number 2, the acting assistant chief. And of course, when we retire, we get a retirement badge that's 1 rank higher than what we officially achieved. So I have the rank of assistant chief as a retired member of the USF Police Department. So really a great career. What I didn't touch on is that I did eventually get that degree. It only took me 16 years to get it, but I did.
But you did it.
I did.
And like I said, I think your career path is just such an amazing track that you followed. So that's why I wanted to get a little bit of background from you. I would definitely say Tyler touched on it. We'll have to bring you back for some other episodes, because I think there is something to be said about being a supervisor in law enforcement and what are some of the pressures and things that come along with that. And then tack on being the highest ranking female at this agency. That's amazing. And there's also pressures and added things that come along with that. So we'll definitely want to bring you back for that kind of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And also, what a great mentor to actually see and value your rise and that you warranted it. And that's very rare. We've all had people that we saw as mentors, and then, you get to the same level and then maybe surpass them, and sometimes bitterness or jealousy creeps in. But it makes me feel good that that's how that worked out for you.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. So
That's pretty special for sure.
Yeah.
So you touched on kind of going down a mental health road when you were in law enforcement. That leads me to ask you, you retire, you're enjoying your wonderful retirement, turning into a beach bum again, maybe, I don't know, but somehow you get involved in the Hope Line. Was that part of having that background? This was something that was kind of always there, that you, like an itch you never scratched?
Kind of. So I really fully expected to be traveling and doing stuff with my husband. But I retired in March, at the end of March in 2021. So what happened? 2020 kind of changed a lot. And one of the things that changed is my husband really wasn't available, even though he was supposed to be ready to retire. He's busy. So I didn't really have a plan because we were supposed to be retired together. And I retired. My husband threw a great retirement party for me. I had 5 of my 6 siblings there, all from all over the country, came and we celebrated, had a great time. My husband and daughter and I had a wonderful trip to Alaska. We did all the things. And then in August, my daughter went back to high school. My husband busy. And I'm like, wow, what am I doing? And I lost my sense of purpose. I am cleaning out closets and I'm miserable. And, you know, I never had that identity as all I was a cop, but I had no identity. Now I am my husband's wife. I didn't have anything. So I decided I needed to find something to do. We were going to be probably about 4 years before my husband was going to be free to do retirement. And COVID kind of changed some of that too. We weren't able to really travel. So I started looking and I got offered jobs. I could have gone to be a police officer somewhere and I really considered it, but I did 33 years at USF and I can still walk. My back I haven't had surgery on my back. I'm still relatively fit. And so I thought, well, you know what? God got me out of this and I don't think he wants me to go back in. Oh, and there were 3 things that happened in 2021 right before I retired that kind of also pushed me towards that. And the first one was in January of 2021 when Sergeant Brian Levine was killed in the line of duty. Brian and I were in the academy together. So he was due to retire. I was retiring 2 months later and that happened to him. And, you know, I said, you know what? God got me out of this safely. I'm not going to go back and try to tempt fate.
No.
So yeah, every day my husband would say, well, why don't you go do this? And I say, nah, I'm not going to do that. Hard time reimagining what you're going to do after spending 33 years in one particular career. But one day I read an article about the first responder Hope Line that had been started by Clara Reynolds at the Crisis Center of Tampa Bay. And I'm reading it and I'm reading her story, which is a pretty incredible story. And I thought, I wonder where I could help on this. So I sent her a message on LinkedIn and I said, I'd really like to talk to you about what you're doing. And I didn't get an answer. And I thought, well, that's weird. And it was right around really Christmas time. And then we go on to church and it's Christmas Eve and I turn around and I've met Claire Reynolds in the past a couple times, most often with my husband recently, but I turn around and there she is at our church on Christmas Eve. And so we go over and talk to her and if it was right before that or right after that, she did respond to my LinkedIn message. So I, just not LinkedIn as regularly. And she says, why don't you come and take a tour of the crisis center? So I go take a tour of the crisis center. After the tour, I go up and talk with Clara and somebody else. I don't think they're there anymore. And she tells me about the Hope Line and she offers me a job on the spot. Well, she says, we are working on getting funding, which they have since gotten, to bring in a first responder ambassador who will represent the Hope Line for 11 counties here, from Pasco south to Collier. and I think you'd be great at it. And I said, well, number one, I need flexibility. Number two, I've done, I've worked. I need a lot of vacation time. I said, and I said, wait a minute, I don't even need vacation time. I need to be able to take off leave without pay, because you leave a state agency. I had so much annual leave, and it just, I could take any time off I needed to if I could get off, but I was done with that, oh no, we need you on the street. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm going to really, whatever job I have, it's going to be something that comes from my heart, but also gives me the flexibility. I had a daughter she's probably a junior in high school, and I'm looking at, colleges. So we're going to go tour, and we toured all over the country. She wanted to go out of state, but fortunately for us, she didn't. But we did tour all over the country, and she ended up right here at home. So they said, yeah, all this is flexible. You do what you want. And I said, okay. So I go home, and my husband says, so how was your meeting with Clara? I said, yeah, it's good. He says, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I took the job. So that's where I landed. And I had to wait for the funding. And in the meantime, I'm really getting antsy. So I actually had another job offer in between. And so I'm calling Clara up and saying, hey, I really want this job. This other job just offered me $10,000 more, but I don't want that job. Right. So it didn't come through. And I started in May of 2022 as the first responder ambassador. And so I'm coming up on 3 years there, and we can talk about, what I'm doing there.
Yeah. So that's still your current role. You're still the ambassador. And what does that look like? What do you do as the ambassador for the Hope Line? And tell us a little bit about that.
So the first thing is that I am the face of the Hope Line. And as a former first responder, I can talk to other first responders, and I have that kind of a credibility where they can see me, and when they see me and hear me talk, they understand that I have worked the same kind of things they do. Yeah. And I talk about how important it is to be able to reach out for mental health resources. Yeah. And if I can talk about it, that can maybe break down some of that stigma that our first responders have, because we are not seeking out these mental health resources. So that's my biggest priority, is to go out there and be the face of this Hope Line, and to get the message out there to our first responders that they are stronger when they access these services. And we want them to do it long before they think they really have a problem. You need to talk about the things that, the things that you should have never had to see, that you can't unsee, right. The things that keep you up at night. We need you to talk about that before it becomes a bigger problem.
Right. So when you were brought into this position, the Hope Line was literally in the infancy stage. What was the evolution of the Hope Line? How did it start? And where is it kind of grown to at this point?
So it actually started in 2020, and it was 2019, 2020, and it really didn't do anything. So COVID happened. So there was a website that was created. There's a partner with a marketing company that the Crisis Center uses. They created a video and a website, and then this phone number, and it was available. But the marketing really didn't go very far, and there was no one reaching out to first responders. Right. So the funding that we got in 2022 allowed for my position, as well as care coordinators, care coordinators are peers, so former first responders, and they are available for anybody who uses this line to contact. They're not necessarily the person who answers the call, but you will be put in touch with the care coordinator, who will be able to kind of help you navigate the resources that they identify. And they're also peers, so they can talk to you, and they have the same kind of lived experience. We have a care coordinator who's a former deputy, and we have another one he's the supervisor, but he's retired from Niagara County Sheriff's Office in New York. And he also has that experience of, knowing what it's like to go to some of these calls. So the Hope Line, when I started, was, I think actually before I started, it was just covering the Tampa Bay area, three counties, Pasco, Hillsborough, and Pinellas. But when I started, we covered 11 counties. So from Pasco south to Collier. And it's grown. We are increasing the numbers of the calls coming in. But what the great news is, in July of this past year, the Attorney General funded it to be a statewide line. So we are now a statewide line. We're working with other agencies throughout the state, other 2-on-1 centers and that kind of thing, to identify care coordinators in those areas, as well as the ambassadors, which I don't know if they have them yet, but that will be doing kind of what I'm doing, but they'll be hitting those particular regions over there. And now all the calls come into our crisis center of Tampa Bay, and then we will send them out to the care coordinators at these other areas to cover the whole state of Florida.
Got it. Now, Tyler, I have a question for you. When you were in Maine or at the federal level or anything like that, have you heard of this type of service being available outside of Florida?
Not the way that she's describing it. On the federal side, it's a little different. They have services just for federal employees, and they have, if you dig in further, federal 1811, still special agents. But again, it's more of, I don't know how to frame it. It's more of like a formalized process, and it kind of ties into a couple questions I have coming up, but like the stigma, because a lot of people don't want to be branded with that. And also it's documented, not the way that Meg is describing it, not to my knowledge. And I don't know of anything like that in Maine, specifically where I was a trooper. Right. But I just real quick, cause I don't want to lose it, but Meg, you referenced that basically providing mental health support before it becomes a crisis. And that's something that has come up in a couple episodes is, well, I'll just ask the question. I'll let you answer it. How is Hopeline, or how are you as the ambassador pushing or spreading the awareness to basically make it part of like your normal regular, well-being? Like everybody goes to the gym, they take care of themselves, they go to the doctor. I'm a big advocate. You should have a therapist or a psychiatrist. Is that kind of what you were talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So a checkup for the neck up. So, you go for your annual physical. You should also go annually for your therapist or a psychological checkup. We have one of the other things I was tasked with was to bring together a strategic planning team. So in June of 2022, I brought together 10 people that I knew in the local area, and we started work on a SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, for our behavioral health resources here in the Tampa Bay area. From that SWOT, we created a strategic plan, and the strategic planning group has grown. So I have about 100 members on my strategic planning email list. We don't always all get together, but yeah, they all get the information. We have created a strategic plan, and it is called Real Hope for First Responders. And you know how we like our acronyms. So REAL is an acronym, and we have 4 pillars in this strategic plan, and it is resources, education, accessibility, and leadership. So each one of those pillars has a group that is working towards their pillar. So resources, we're trying to identify more culturally competent clinicians that are not going to be traumatized when a first responder goes to them and tells them about the terrible scene that's keeping them up at night. So that's resources. Education, we want to educate in the academy. We want people to be aware of mental health and resilience before they ever start out on the street. But we also want to cover it again throughout your career, and very importantly, as you get ready to retire, and then maybe have some availability for those in retirement, because, even, and I like to say, I know all about this stuff. And yet there I was sitting at home trying to figure out what my purpose was, because, I didn't have anything to do every day. So we need to help people prepare throughout their career. And so that's education. Accessibility. Nobody wants to use your EAP. We all have a little bit of a paranoia thing going on. Yep. EAPs are not always very good either. So, and culturally competent is not necessarily a paramount there either. So we want to find a way to make it accessible. The Hope line is a 24/7 confidential line, not connected to any other police agency or fire agency. So that's number one, that's accessible. And then we can connect them to the resources that we have. But then a question of insurance or how we pay. So we have pie in the sky ideas on what we'd like to do there. We would love to make this to where no cost, no insurance for our first responders to access this. We're not there yet, but we certainly have those as strategic goals for us. And then the final pillar is leadership, where we want to make sure that our leaders are supporting the idea that, well, number one, a checkup for the neck up. Everybody should be checking in with mental health resources and getting just an opportunity to talk about some of the trauma that you've experienced. So those are the 4 pillars, and I think that kind of answers your questions, but maybe a little bit longer.
No, I appreciate it. And this is where, like you were saying, the EAP and the stigma and insurance and paying for it, that's where a lot of the stigma comes, because they're like, oh, if you use your insurance, the agency's going to find out. But if it's an annual thing or whatever, quarter, every 3 months, whatever it ends up being, it's standard. So there's not, you know what I mean? It's not like, oh, this guy's obviously got a problem. It's like, no, everybody's doing the same thing. So it kind of, I would hope, try to eliminate the stigma and then also educating people. But let me ask you this, as Hopeline is expanding, what kind of reception are you getting from agencies? Are you getting any pushback, or what's that conversation been like?
Really, I am getting good response. When I get to go there and talk, they all seem to be very, very much supportive of this. But I know, I worked in law enforcement agencies. I know that there are people that will say to your face how much they support things. Whether or not it carries through, I can't tell you. I know people in different agencies that, oh yeah, they talk all about that, but that just doesn't happen. They don't follow through. And that's a problem. And there's also a problem with, this is just one more of the initiatives that they have that they're trying to support, and things tend to get overwhelming. Agencies get just bombarded with things they need to do, and this is usually the first thing to go. Finding time to send your officers to retreats or finding funding for that, it's going to be the first thing to go.
Yeah.
So by and large, I'd say it's very positive. I really think this is the time for us to be hitting our first responders, because everyone seems to be a little more open to the idea of mental health resources for first responders than ever before.
Yeah, I can tell you in the last 2 years, maybe. I mean, again, just it's when you become aware of something, I guess, maybe obviously before that, but I've seen it talked about a lot more on bigger podcasts or social media, or even within our own agencies. They are talking about it a lot more, so it's more in the forefront. But kind of like what you said, what does that look like on the back end, and how do you eliminate some of that stigma? And like Mo and I, we have a mutual friend, BJ, who openly talks about going to therapy. He's been doing it since he was in college, and it's just an awareness that he has, and he doesn't give a shit what anybody else thinks about it, which I love about him. But at the same time, I've seen it where they will do presentations like what you're talking about. Hey, this person's coming from this crisis line or whatever. There's old head disgruntled deputies or whatever. They will literally either just not show up, or they will turn and sit backwards and not even face the presenter, because they just want nothing to do with it, which it's disheartening. But, and again, I'm not saying you're not going to be able to change everybody, but at least putting that out there, I think, is huge.
Yeah. I think what I've found is when I can get in front of people and talk, and usually I do talk about how, at 3:00 in the morning when I was a midnight shift sergeant and I had somebody who needed help, and you can see their faces change. So you might have something here that I might want to listen to. Yeah. And it's because I come from the same field, or even I can even connect with fire with that same story, because they start to see that, but they're not going to take it from anybody. You've got to have that kind of a connection, that kind of lived experience, which is what this model is about. And what I didn't say is there's a veteran support line here in Florida that was started at the crisis center. Also, it was started in 2014. And it's a statewide line, and it has grown tremendously since it started. This Hope line was modeled after that. So the same agency started it at the crisis center, and we hope to be just as successful as that veteran support line is.
And Mo, I'm just going to jump in. Yeah, I'm going to jump in because I want to get into the next question. Basically, in a perfect world, how could the Hope Line be executed? But I just want to drive the point home that it's hard for me to kind of ramble through this, but basically we're trying to push out. You want to start getting help before you get to that suicidal ideations. You should still get help if that's happening. 100%. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but we all know, especially if you were in law enforcement for 33 years, you see the effects of, divorces, the problems at home, children, friendships, and you can see how people begin to change. And if you're not getting help, you're not going to be able to address it until sometimes it's too late. Or like you said, you've retired now and you're like, well, shit, now what am I going to do? And that sense of helplessness. So I want to just kind of say all that before going into, in a perfect world, how could the Hope Line be executed? Let's just stay in Florida for now, but I'd love to see this nationwide, but we'll keep it in Florida for now.
So the number one thing I want is I have these little plastic cards. They fit in your shirt pocket, your breast pocket. And I would love for every first responder in the state of Florida to have that, because if they can give it to their coworker when they need it, when they're experiencing something, just call. A lot of our calls are really not for mental health, but we get that opportunity to have a little bit of a conversation with them about that when we share the resource that they're looking for. So it's not just for mental health resources. It's for any resource they need. It's like 211, but for specific first responder resources. Now we're building our resource list. So, it's still challenging to get the right resources in place, but it's available for anything our first responders need. And yes, we have 211 backs it up. So any resource that 211 has, we're going to have as well in the Hope Line. But get that to every first responder out there so that they, no matter what, 24/7, they have a confidential line they can call. You may have a great therapist, you may have a great EAP, whatever it is, but this is available 24/7. So, and the people that answer that line are trained to intervene for, they're 988 operators. They also, can help you for all kinds of things. So that's number one. And number two is getting culturally competent clinicians, because if you get a first responder who goes finally to a therapist to talk about the horrendous murder scene that they had to go respond to, and they traumatize the clinician, and the clinician stops them crying and says, stop, I can't hear anymore. You can't talk about that. They will never go back. Yeah. And that doesn't help us. Yeah. So we need to get clinicians that have an understanding of the kinds of horrible trauma that our first responders experience and be there so that they can go before it becomes, because we spiral. We go from, that's kind of bothers me. It's keeping me up at night. So now I'm going to, or in the daytime, if you're a midnight shift officer trying to sleep in the daytime. Yep. So I'm going to get home at 6:00. I'm going to crack open a couple of beers. I might take an Ambien. And the next thing you know, you're hooked on something. And now you have disciplinary problems at work. And who's to say whatever came first here? But so many of our first responders are that they're not sleeping. And, there's a lot of reasons we're not sleeping, just work related. We have to go to court in the middle of the day. Yeah. All those things. So we need to learn about the things that will be helpful to keep our mental health. One is seeing a therapist. Another is sleep hygiene. Yeah. But all those things come together. And we, first responders, we all know, we recognize people that need help. Cops know all about, somebody they see on the street. Oh yeah, that guy's needs some help. We never see it in ourselves. So we need to be open to that idea that we could use some help. We need to break that stigma. And in the perfect world, we have first responders that do not have a stigma about seeking those mental health resources.
Yeah. I want to build on one thing you said earlier. Sorry, Tyler. I just want
No,
to
go
check
ahead.
what you had said earlier, and I think it's important to drive home my experience with the Hope Line. This is something that I found very interesting, is that quite often we get the phone call not because the cop is saying or the firefighter is saying, I'm having a mental break. They're saying, I need financial help. I need help with, a resource that's completely not mental health, but because they're at least breaking that wall, it gives us an in to be able to talk to them about their mental health.
Right.
So I think that's something that's super important to clarify with the Hope Line, that it isn't just, we're going to call and how are you feeling? Those warm and fuzzy conversations. Quite often they start with, I need help because I don't know how I'm going to pay my utility, or I need help because my house has been flooded in the storms that we just recently had.
Right. We've had first responders call because they want to get their kid help. And gee, guess what? We find out that they could really use a little bit of a conversation with a peer as well. And so if we get them to make that call, a lot of times there's other things we can provide. And yeah, they may not use it for mental health resources, but they may find that after talking to a care coordinator that maybe they would be okay with talking to a therapist about some of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that ties in. So, Mike, not to put you on the spot, but I guess I am. Can you list off some of the resources currently available? And again, we'll stick with what, full scope. What would it look like? All the resources, but could you just list off maybe some of the other ones?
So there are some retreat centers here in the state of Florida. I know there's one in Sarasota, and I think there's another one in Jacksonville that are specific for first responders that can go, and they're free. But again, getting away, you work a midnight shift or whatever is difficult. We have a list of culturally competent clinicians available. Again, if you're talking about the statewide, I don't know how well we cover that. And I've been working in the Tampa Bay area to try to identify them. And we're also working to get training to our clinicians. And there are a couple different options there available. And actually, I just learned about another one today. So clinicians can get training to where they can get a certification and as a culturally competent clinician. Again, everybody's different. You're going to need every solution doesn't work for everyone. So yep. It may be a clinician. It may be equine therapy. There are a lot of different resources. I can't really give you, I hope okay. We have a list that's too numerous for me to be able to give you, but I do have some knowledge of some availability. But if you really want to know, call the Hope Line.
There we go. That's kind of where I was going with it. Go ahead, Mo. Sorry.
No, you're fine. You touched on this a little bit, and I just want to get a little bit more dive into a little bit more when we talked about the stigmas, because that seems to be that dark cloud that follows why law enforcement isn't getting help, why that they only make the phone call when they have the gun already at their, at the ready, essentially. The stigma is really the holdup. What are people going to think? What is my family going to think? So first of all, let's talk about what are some of those stigmas and what is the Hope Line doing in an effort to try to combat some of the stigmas that we're having to come up against, because that's, I think, is our biggest hurdle.
So there's a couple of things right off the bat. Number one, to get the job, we had to visit with a psychologist. And it wasn't fun. It was really unpleasant. Some people more than others.
Right.
So that's our experience with a psychologist, number one. Number two, we deal with mental health crisis on the street. I've heard that discussed here in this podcast. We deal with it all the time. We certainly recognize it. Signal 20, we're all cops here.
Yes.
Signal 20. We all know what a Signal 20 is. Well, we're the people that save people. So us admitting that we might be a little Signal 20, no, we can't do that. Oh, I'm sorry. It just left my head. The rubber gun squad. So yeah, we're concerned that we'll lose our livelihood. We won't be able to support our family. If somebody hears that I have a mental health issue, I will be taken off the street. I will be put in the records section, and they'll take my gun, and I'll never get back out of the street again. And here's another problem. I have built my life around the fact that I have to work off duty every waking moment that I'm not on the shift. Right. And I don't have enough money to be going on, whatever, light duty or just, giving up that because you're going to go attend a retreat or something.
Right.
So that those are some of the stigmas, but really, I think the biggest thing is that we are the savior. We are the people that are out there saving people's lives, and we are not supposed to need that kind of help.
Yeah.
Like I said, we never see it in ourselves. We see it in everyone else, but we don't see it in ourselves.
Yeah. I can tell you one thing. I see the Hope Line having these ambassadors is going to be a huge way to kind of make that hurdle. Like you said, you walk into a room and people are more apt to listen to you because you go, hey, I'm not just some random person that decided to study mental health. I'm someone who did what you do and recognized the mental health component when I happened to be in the job. And I think, like for me, that's one of the things, not necessarily when I was doing the job, but when I started training people to do the job, that's where the mental health like light bulb went off for me that like, this is an important piece. And then I started retrospecting in my career at things that I'm like, oh yeah, that was rough. And the reason why you considered leaving your job was because you were having that point where you're going, why am I doing this? So having those conversations like that, I think is helping with the stigma. Having the ambassadors, I think that's a great way. Are there any other things that the Hope Line has in the works to try to help with the stigma part of it?
So the personal stories are very important, and the stories of first responders seeking mental health resources. And I can't say that enough. Now they have to be willing to do that. But
right.
If we could get first responders to talk about how they have gone out because they were having an issue. And again, let's try to get it before it becomes crisis,
right.
That they went and talked to somebody because it was keeping them up at night. And they got a clinician, and they go now regularly because it feels so good to be able to talk about those things, those personal stories. We're also working on a PSA that's going to feature some leadership from some agencies talking about how much they support mental health resources and accessing the Hope Line and their support of their first responders that will access that, and how, we can to as much as possible, there's a job waiting for you when you complete the help you need, get the help you need.
Love it. Tyler, anything to add a question on that?
Well, what I would say is that you mentioned a bunch of things about people that you had worked with, and I could say that now that I can look back, I was going through a lot of that. I was that first time working shift work, and I always justified what I was doing because I'm like, I need to sleep. So I was that guy trying to take Ambien and would get off at 6 or 7 in the morning, like, man, I need to decompress or sleep. So I would have a drink or two for me, because it's like, yeah, it's 6 a.m., but it's really my 6 p.m. I justified it all the time. And you realize I wasn't in the moment seeing the effect that it was having on my family at the time. But again, I can hindsight, it's 2020. I was like, ooh, none of that is normal, and that's not good. That's not a healthy way to deal with it. But also, I just want to touch on, before we get too far ahead, we're coming up on time, but when you were like, you're going all the way back when you said at 3 a.m, you're having that conversation peer to peer where they're kind of dumping on you, that rings with me because I felt like I couldn't dump that on my significant other, and I definitely didn't want to dump it on my kids, and I didn't think anybody outside of law enforcement would understand. And so I would dump that stuff. And now I've referenced this before. I was lucky because I had BJ and Mo, and I had a couple other great supervisors that I could talk to about these things that were empathetic and didn't make me feel like, hey, keep that shit to yourself. They would listen to it and actually give me credible advice, but not everybody has that. Sometimes you're only working with the same 3 or 4 people, and you're like, these guys are idiots. I'm not telling them nothing.
Well, yeah.
So
it's funny that you say that, because I talked to my husband, and he was a first responder also, and I said, the divorce problem in law enforcement probably fire too. And I said, it's because at 3 o'clock in the morning you're telling your partner things that you should be talking to your spouse or your significant other about. Yeah. And we always talked about that. I'm like, don't you be talking about that. You might be working midnight shift, but you come home and talk to me about these things.
That's right.
But it's very true. I knew some things about divorces and things that, we're there for each other, and we are, and we are peer support. But again, a lot of those things we need to learn how to talk with our family about. We need to be able to make them feel comfortable and share with them the thing. And now we don't want to give them trauma, but they need to understand too. And the Hope Line is available not just for our first responders, but for their families. And I bring two perspectives, because I was not only just a first responder, but I was also the spouse who got the phone call at 3:00 in the morning that, hey, he's not home yet, and the phone's ringing, and gee, what's happening? And, fortunate for me, I've said this before, he tells me that there was an officer killed in the line of duty, but it wasn't him. And I'm jumping for joy, but it wasn't him. It was someone we work with. So the things that your spouses and significant others go through, that they need resources too. So, yeah.
No, that ties in. And again, this isn't it's not something I came up with, but just through conversations on really speaking to divorce and all that, and kind of how that begins. And I had somebody much smarter than me say, you begin to compartmentalize your professional life from your personal life. So you're Deputy Tyler when you're at the street, and you have this persona and you have this image and you have this feeling, and then you go home and you turn that part off. And really what your family sees is you pulling away and you changing. Yeah. And that leads to, well, you don't understand me. You don't know anything. But this other person who I talk to in my professional life, they fully get it. They know who I am. That's not true. They know that version of you. And in the meantime, you've pulled away and you've kind of changed your personality when you're home, because that's the best way you know how to deal with it. So I was going to ask you if the Hope Line's available, not just law enforcement, but family. So I'm glad you addressed that. But these are, again, and when I just bring it all back to perspective. When you first start and you're in everyone's in their 20s, 22, 23 sometimes, you're just beginning your life. These are large scale things that you're trying to process while also still processing how to be a good cop and keep yourself safe. So I just want to keep pushing that out there, that this needs to be something that's incorporated. Check up from the neck up. I like that. I'm going to steal that. It should be a regular thing, not once the world's falling out around you.
Yeah, well, throw in there women in law enforcement in the 80s, and how, you want to compartmentalize and you want to make sure that the guys that you're working with don't see you being affected by the things that you're seeing. And you've got to be tough, because, in 1988, there weren't a lot of women in law enforcement, and some of the women were tougher than the men. And that wasn't the kind of cop I wanted to be. There were few role models that you could still be a woman and still be effective as a law enforcement officer. So,
another very unique perspective.
Yes. So it absolutely, the family is very important. And again, like I said, that 3:00 in the morning conversation are things probably you should be sharing with your significant other, whoever that is.
No, absolutely. And again, I know we've already said it a couple of times, but Meg, I hope you agree to come back, because I have so many questions unrelated to mental health. Just
so many.
The 80s and the training on the supervisory. Oh, I have so many more questions, but I don't want to get too far off track. We'll bring that back. Mo, I'll let you get us back on track. Sorry.
Yes, sir. We've talked about a lot of heavy stuff, but I know from my time with being part of the resource committee that there's a lot of success that we're having in this Hope Line. So I don't want to gloss over that and not talk about what are some success stories that the Hope Line has had.
Well, I don't have a lot of good stories, but I can tell you we've had first responders, again, when somebody called about their child, and in the meantime, while they're talking about the things their child are going through, they find that there's a resource for them as well, and we're able to connect them with that resource. In my travels, when I go out, it's amazing to hear people say, oh, I am so glad that you're doing this, because this is so needed. Yeah. So really, the success story that I get the most is that when I get to these agencies and I talk about this, they are saying that this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, that this is what the profession has needed for a long time. And they just wish us tremendous success. And I can't give you, when people call the Hope Line, it's a confidential line. Nobody wants anybody to know what they're calling for. Right. But we are getting calls. The numbers are going up. We are providing resources to our first responders. And And we are seeing that they are continuing to share that resource and get the word out.
Yeah.
And the more people that know about it, the better off we'll be. We'll continue to grow.
Absolutely. And I know that we can't share the stories. When I say success, exactly what you just shared with us, like that we're getting the phone calls, we're getting it out there. I know from my experience with being part of the strategic planning committee and doing the pillars, I'm seeing the energy and the atmosphere of the room is definitely getting more alive, because I think that we are seeing what it could be. We're seeing where we can take it. We're looking at all these different ways that we can build this out to make it as successful as the veteran life. So that's where I think we are doing a good job with measuring our success.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And since we're on the topic, what's the best ways to reach the Hope Line? And then also, I guess, so what's the current way to reach them? And then what are some thoughts for the future ways to reach the Hope Line?
So number one is the number. It's 1-866-4-FLP-ROW. There's another access through the website, which has just changed. So I haven't verified it. It was lasttoask.com, but we've changed it to bring our brand more together. So it's firstresponderhope.com, and there is a method to ask for services from that website. So you can go on there and request, and they will email you back. So those are the two methods. I don't know where we stand with, things like text.
Yep.
And what else could there be?
Apps. I was going to push. I was going to say a Hope Line app. That would be amazing.
So that was discussed at our recent meeting, and absolutely that's a possibility. We don't have any current plans, but it's certainly been something that we've talked about. And the app seems to be, and truthfully, I do it too. If I can do it from an app, or if I can get the text to support rather than have to make that phone call, I'll do that any day. So yeah, those are a couple of the ways that we could probably expand it.
Very cool. I would say that I have been so humbled with being part of this process with you. I came in obviously well after you became an ambassador, but I'm just super excited to see where this Hope Line is going to go and how much further we're going to be able to push it, and how many people we are going to be able to help, because I think that this is something that I could see law enforcement leaning into way more than their EAP programs, because we do have that almost like we are naturally, because we're cops, we don't trust anybody. So I could see this definitely being a somewhere that we can actually do some real impact. So I am super excited. And I'm honored that you came here to join us on our podcast and to share a lot of the information that we've had an opportunity to talk about today.
Well, I thank you so much for having me, and a great opportunity for me, and really so much fun.
Yeah.
So it's really great to talk about our careers and how we, I've forgotten half of the things that I ever did in my career. So it's really fun to relive some of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Final words?
No, I really appreciate it. This is, again, when we first started this podcast, I didn't know what direction it was going to take. I was just trying to capture stories, and really I kind of started it for my children, but it's kind of morphed into just kind of trying to dig into more aspects as they pop up. And again, like I said, people much smarter than me that I talked to that listen to some of the episodes are like, hey man, I didn't realize you were going through that, or I never knew that. Or, some of my favorites are my children going, Dad, I had no idea that was something you were dealing with. So anyway, it's beginning to kind of morph into something else, but I'm very excited. And I'm very serious. I would love to have you back on and kind of maybe a different aspect, but I really appreciate your time. And I'm glad to hear you're doing good work, expanding from 3 counties to 11. And now you got statewide funding, or at least approval for the line. So these are directions that are positive, and it makes me excited, makes me hopeful.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me, and I'd be happy to come back, and please continue to do what you're doing, and especially work on supporting mental health for our first responders.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Enjoyed it.
It's fun.